I'm John Anderson, and this is my persuasive speech. The United States accepts over 1 million immigrants every year, and the percentage of foreign-born citizens has tripled over the past 30 years, as evidenced by this visual. There's a great amount of debate in politics right now about whether or not this is actually a good thing for our society. I'm speaking about this because it seems to be an issue that lies outside the mainstream Overton window, and many people that share concerns about this issue are simply written off as being xenophobic. I'm not here to attack any particular group of immigrants, just to highlight the objective issues that come with these large movements of people. I believe that immigration at its current rate is harmful both to our society as well as the nations that immigrants come from. The most obvious harm is economic. It is indeed true that immigrants can improve the economy in certain circumstances. For example, when there are more jobs than people, immigrants can fill those jobs, making production of goods and services cheaper, lowering prices for everyone. However, this requires a particular balance because, as the basic economic principle of supply and demand will explain, when you increase the supply of a commodity, you ultimately reduce its value. In this case, immigration reduces the supply of labor, and which effectively means that we're lowering the value of labor, which in other words, that means that we're lowering people's wages. And if wages decline too much, it counteracts the positive aspects of immigration. And this hurts the poorest among us the most because they're the ones generally competing with immigrants, and they're the ones who had the most to lose in the first place. Meanwhile, wealthy business owners are benefiting by being able to exploit the cheaper labor. And I believe this financial incentive is part of the reason why immigration is so high in the first place. When there are more people than jobs, those people are forced to compete over those jobs, and they generally do so by accepting a lower paying position. When there are more jobs than people, however, companies are forced to compete over what little employees there are available, and they generally do this by raising wages for those people. It's also true that immigrants can increase GDP simply because there's a higher population of people to produce and consume goods. This is great at a national level, but on an individual level, it presents some problems. The increase in population can often outrun the increase in GDP. This means that even though the economy appears to be stronger, the economy is spread more thinly between more people, and that means it's not a benefit at all to those people. While I'm certain many immigrants are hardworking, the statistical reality is that they are twice as likely as the native population to depend on some sort of welfare program, suggesting that the current immigration system in the United States is actually a net drain on the economy. There's also the argument that immigration is a moral good because it allows us to provide a better life towards the impoverished people of the world. The sad reality is that there is far more poverty in the world than there is wealth. And if the United States were to try to help these people by opening its arms to immigration, it would simply be a drop in the bucket. Therefore, it's just as morally righteous for us to focus on helping our own impoverished citizens before those of other countries. In fact, high levels of immigration can even hurt those other countries in a process known as brain drain. For example, there's sort of a stereotype in the United States that many medical professionals tend to be Indian immigrants. This stereotype exists because if you put in the effort to become a doctor in India, it's very likely that you'll utilize that wealth to move to the Western world because you're far more likely to have a better life here. And the result is that India, a nation of almost 2 billion people, has almost no doctors to care for all those people. Economics is, of course, not the only issue. Another major issue is the clashing of different cultures, which causes instability in society. Americans seem to be somewhat naive about the value systems of other societies. It seems like we tend to think that values like equality and freedom are universally held beliefs by all humans. But things like our utter failure to democratize Iraq are evidence to the contrary. Foreigners inevitably bring their culture with them when they immigrate to the United States. This is not inherently bad because those cultures might have something very positive to provide for us in our own culture, but they're just as likely to provide something bad as well. For example, if we were to accept 100,000 immigrants from Saudi Arabia, that would mean that there's almost 100,000 more people in the United States that believe that women should be second-class citizens, and they'd be able to exercise that opinion with their vote. Immigration certainly does have some benefits to our culture, but it also poses the danger of rapidly shifting our culture in a negative direction. Historically, we solved this problem by allowing immigration in waves, where we would allow a lot of people in for a few decades and then cut off immigration for another few decades, allowing those people to assimilate. But immigration has been too high for too long, and we're starting to see cultural enclaves form in the United States because people are unable to assimilate because they're surrounded by people of their own culture. And this is evidenced more so in Europe than in the United States. European nations have an even higher rate of immigration than the United States does, and much of this immigration comes from places in the world where things like child marriage and spousal abuse are considered socially acceptable. And these immigrants have been able to form their own communities within European countries. And this has led to a disturbing rise in sex crimes in countries that once considered themselves to be bastions of social progress. This also creates, unfortunately, a lot of resentment among the native population against these immigrants. Historical examples like Yugoslavia show us how having multiple conflicting cultures within a single country can cause a great deal of instability. I've listed many issues with immigration, but what are some solutions? I believe that our immigration system is in need of a significant priority check. Historically, we accepted talented individuals that we felt would be a net benefit to our society. Over the past 30 years, immigration has been geared more towards increasing the ethnic diversity of the United States rather than bringing in talent. And as a result, we've lately been tending to accept large amounts of applicants regardless of how much they'll contribute to society. It's absolutely true that many immigrants are still hardworking Americans, but many also come here with the explicit goal of utilizing the economic benefits that our government provides. And this is in stark contrast to immigrants of past eras who made this country into what it is today by settling the western states. It's also important that we consider the values of the people coming here. If a prospective immigrant doesn't value concepts such as individualism, freedom, or equality, then America is simply not a good match for them, and they're not a good match for us. No one would want a self-affirmed neo-Nazi to be granted citizenship in the United States, and so it makes sense that we would apply a certain ideological standard to immigrants. I also believe it's necessary to cut back on the total amount of immigration happening in order to allow the immigrants already here time to assimilate and to relieve the economic pressure on our lower class. It's not clear that our restructuring of our immigration system has been a net benefit to society. You might be asking, why has immigration been made this way? I believe it's because it's a major benefit to both sides of the political establishment. Republicans benefit financially when businesses are able to exploit the cheaper labor of immigrants. And Democrats benefit because immigrants that come here and end up depending on welfare systems end up voting Democrat far more often than not. It's not feasible for everyone in the world to be an American citizen, and that's why we need to think very hard about who we give that honor to.